No one knew what Xiao Zhan did backstage that night, and maybe no one was ever meant to. The cameras captured everything on stage. The laughter, the unexpected reunion, the glances heavy enough to set entire fandoms on fire. But backstage, far away from the spotlight's burn, something happened that didn't require words, noise, or scripted performances. It was a moment so quiet, so human, so startlingly raw that even Wang Yibo, who barely blinked at chaos, felt his breath catch for a reason he couldn't name. The night had already been strange enough. Two people who had not been seen on the same stage in years suddenly standing side by side again. Fans screamed in disbelief. Staff pretended everything was normal. The internet shattered like thin ice under a heavy step. And somewhere in the whirlwind, Wang Yibo felt a weight he had been carrying for over 500 days shift. Not fall, not disappear, just shift, subtly but unmistakably. Hours later, after the show ended and the corridors thinned out, he walked into the backstage dressing area, expecting nothing more than silence. But what he found instead stopped him cold. Xiao Zhan was already there. Not talking. Not waiting. Just standing in front of a mirror with a small object in his hand. An object Yibo recognized instantly. It was the old bracelet from their filming days. The one a stylist had jokingly called a good luck charm. The one they had both touched before difficult scenes. The one that had somehow survived years of chaos, rumors, separation, schedules, and storms without being lost. Yibo froze in the doorway. No cameras. No audience. No explanations. Just him. And Xiao Zhan. And a piece of their history quietly catching the yellow glow of the dressing room lights. "You kept that," Yibo whispered, voice thinner than he expected. Xiao Zhan didn't turn immediately. He just looked at the bracelet for a long, thoughtful moment, fingers brushing it gently like it was fragile, as fragile as the bond the world tried to break 1,000 times. Then he said, barely above a breath, "Some things aren't meant to be thrown away." It hit harder than it should have. Not the words themselves, but the simplicity, the truth hiding inside them. It filled the room with a heaviness that didn't suffocate. It grounded. And for the first time that night, Yibo felt the world around him slow to a pace he could breathe in. He stepped inside, letting the door click softly behind him. The silence didn't crack. Deepened. Transformed. It wrapped around them like a warm blanket in a freezing room, and Yibo was the first to break it, but only because it felt like an ache inside him. "Why now?" he asked quietly. "Of all nights, why show me that now?" Xiao Zhan finally turned. His expression wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotional. It was something far more piercing. Calm honesty, the kind a person reveals only when they're tired of pretending. "Because when you said you hadn't acted in 500 days, Xiao Zhan said, "I realized you weren't just talking about work." The impact was immediate. Yibo swallowed. Hard. He opened his mouth to respond, to deny, to cover, but nothing came out. Because deep down, Xiao Zhan wasn't wrong. The hiatus wasn't just about acting. It was about losing parts of himself along the way. About losing joy. Losing clarity. Losing spark. And realizing, too late, that silence comes when a person forgets who they once were. Xiao Zhan took a step closer, closing the distance but not touching him. The bracelet swung lightly against his fingers, catching the light like a heartbeat. "You disappeared," Xiao Zhan murmured. "Not from the public. From yourself." Yibo exhaled shakily. A truth he had avoided naming sat suddenly between them. "I didn't know how to come back," he confessed. "And yet," Xiao Zhan said gently, "you showed up tonight." Was. Breath. A universe spelled out without a single dramatic gesture. Then, without another word, Xiao Zhan held out the bracelet. Not forcing it. Not offering it as a gift. But simply presenting it, like an unspoken bridge back to who Yibo once was. Yibo's hand moved on instinct before his mind could catch up. His fingers brushed Xiao Zhan's warm against warm, and for a split second the world outside, the noise, the fandoms, the speculation, the pressure, vanished. All that remained was the small contact point and the pulse of something familiar, something long buried, something almost frightening in its sincerity. Finally, Yibo took the bracelet. He didn't put it on. He just held it. Like a reminder. Like a promise. Like a truth he wasn't ready to name but couldn't ignore anymore. He looked up at Xiao Zhan, voice quiet but steady. "Why did you keep it?" Xiao Zhan's answer came without hesitation. "Because not everything that's real needs to be seen." The words hit harder than any headline, any rumor, any internet frenzy. They cut right through the noise surrounding them and settled into the one space Yibo hadn't been able to reach for over a year. His center. Before either of them could say more, a sudden flash of light spilled across the floor from the hallway as the door cracked open. A staff member peeked in, surprised to find both of them inside. "Oh, sorry. They need Xiao Zhan for a quick photo outside." Xiao Zhan nodded politely. As the staff member rushed away, he turned back to Yibo. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary. No drama. No intensity. Just two people recognizing something unspoken. As Xiao Zhan walked toward the door, Yibo found himself speaking without planning to. "Xiao Zhan." He stopped, looked back, waited. Yibo raised the bracelet slightly. "Thank you." Simple phrase. Polished. But real. Painfully real in a way the industry rarely allowed. Xiao Zhan's expression softened, a quiet glow settling in his eyes. "I didn't do anything," he said, but the weight behind his voice said otherwise. "Yes," Yibo whispered. "You did." When Xiao Zhan stepped out, the room felt empty for the briefest moment, the silence almost too loud. But then Yibo looked down at the bracelet again and felt something shift inside him. Not healing. Not closure. Not resolution. Just movement, the first gentle push forward after being stuck in the same place for too long. Later that night, long after the show ended and the dressing room lights went dark, Yibo sat alone in his car, fingers still wrapped around the bracelet. Beijing's midnight streets glowed around him. Headlights streaking past like silent comets, neon signs flickering through raindrops on the windshield. He lifted the bracelet, turned it, studied it. A memory flashed, a moment from years ago, long before the world cared, long before the spotlight swallowed them whole. Xiao Zhan had jokingly tapped the bracelet and said, "As long as this survives, so will we." Back then they laughed. Tonight, the words returned with a strange echo. Yibo finally slipped the bracelet onto his wrist. Not because he believed in symbols. Not because the world wanted something to talk about. But because, for the first time in 500 days, he felt something inside him wake up. Something that felt like him. He leaned back in the seat, closed his eyes, and let the silence fill him. Not the silence of disappearance, but the silence of becoming. And somewhere across the city, Xiao Zhan walked into a burst of camera flashes with a faint smile tugging at his lips, as if he somehow knew that a silent gesture had just changed everything. When Wang Yibo finally opened his eyes again in the quiet darkness of his parked car, the bracelet on his wrist felt heavier than anything he had worn in months. Not physically. Its weight was emotional, invisible, a weight that carried memories he had packed away so tightly that even thinking about them felt like touching an old bruise. Yet now, with the faint hum of traffic outside and the lingering warmth of Xiao Zhan's gesture still pressing against his chest, that old bruise didn't hurt. Pulsed. He placed his hand over the bracelet as though afraid it might slip off and disappear like everything else he had lost in the past 500 days. The leather was worn, softer now with age, its charm scratched from time and use. Felt familiar. Felt like home. His phone buzzed again. A message from his manager. A schedule adjustment. A reminder he hadn't replied in hours. He locked the screen and tossed the phone aside. None of that mattered tonight. Nothing mattered except the quiet tremor running through him. The tremor of something waking up after being dormant for too long. Across the city, in another quiet building overlooking the glowing streets, Xiao Zhan stood in front of a mirror once again. The same mirror he had stood before earlier that night. The dressing room was empty now. Silent except for the faint hum of an old air conditioner and the distant thud of staff cleaning up the stage. He stared at his reflection. Not at his styled hair. Not at the makeup melting softly under the harsh lights. Not at the outfit chosen for him. He stared at his own eyes, searching for the reason why he kept that bracelet for so long. Why he carried it into this night specifically. Why handing it to Yibo felt like releasing something he had held onto for far too long. Maybe he knew the answer. Maybe he didn't want to admit it yet. Either way, the silence around him felt like a response. Steady, honest, and grounding. He exhaled slowly. Back in the car, Yibo finally turned the ignition and pulled out into the near-empty midnight streets. The neon lights streaked across his windshield like lines of color drawn across a dark canvas. The city was alive but not loud, not chaotic, just breathing like him. He didn't go home. Instead, he drove through familiar roads he hadn't taken in years, routes that twisted through memories he had forgotten he still had. The old rehearsal street. The studio where he once learned hip-hop in a cramped room with mirrors cracked along the edges. The tiny ramen shop where he and his early castmates used to eat after long shooting days. Every place held a ghost of a younger, freer version of himself. He parked finally near the riverside walkway, a place where he used to sit and think before fame turned him into a shadow the world chased. The air was cold, crisp. It bit gently against his skin as he walked toward the railing overlooking the dark water. For a moment he just stood there, fingers tapping lightly against the bracelet. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Low. Familiar. His breath caught for reasons he didn't understand. He turned. Xiao Zhan stood a few steps away, hands in his pockets, breath visible in the chilled air. He looked almost unreal in the glow of the river lights. Not like an actor, not like a celebrity, but like someone who simply belonged there at that exact moment, without needing to explain how or why he arrived. Ba blinked. You followed me. Xiao Zhan shook his head with a quiet smile. I guessed. You always come here when you're thinking, he said softly. You used to, at least. The words settled deeply. Another forgotten truth resurfaced. Yibo turned back toward the water. I didn't think anyone remembered that. I remember everything, Xiao Zhan murmured. And the river below them rippled like it heard something it wasn't supposed to. Yibo didn't respond. He didn't know how to. Silence spread between them again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, weighted with meaning, like the air after a confession that still hasn't been voiced fully. They stood side by side without speaking, just listening to the water churning quietly beneath the bridge. After a moment, Xiao Zhan's voice broke through the quiet, gentle but firm. What were you going to do with it? The bracelet. Yibo looked down at it again. His fingers brushed the charm lightly, almost unconsciously. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe remember. Remember what? Yibo hesitated. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because saying it felt too vulnerable. Then finally he whispered. That I used to feel alive. A soft wind blew past them, tugging at their clothes. And you don't now? Xiao Zhan asked. Yibo closed his eyes. Not for a long time. Xiao Zhan turned to face him. His expression wasn't pity. It wasn't concern. It was something far deeper. Understanding unspoken carved from their shared history. You don't have to be lost forever, he said quietly. I'm not lost, Yibo said slowly. Just disconnected. Then reconnect. Yibo let out a breathless laugh. It's not that simple. It is, Xiao Zhan answered. You just need a spark. A spark. Yes. Xiao Zhan stepped closer. Something to wake you up again. Yibo's heart beat once. Hard, deep, startling. What if I don't find it, he asked. Xiao Zhan smiled faintly. Then let something find you. Before Yibo could respond, Xiao Zhan reached out, slowly, gently, and touched the bracelet on Yibo's wrist. Not holding him. Not grabbing. Just a light, grounding touch, the kind that could shatter a person if they weren't ready. Yibo froze. The world stilled. Their eyes met, and for a second the silence between them wasn't silence anymore. It was recognition. Memory. 1,000 words neither dared to say. Then Xiao Zhan pulled his hand back, stepping away as though the air itself had turned fragile. "Don't disappear again," he said softly. "Not like that. Not from yourself." Yibo stared at him, unable to speak. The river whispered between them. Finally Xiao Zhan turned to leave. But after a few steps, he paused, looked back over his shoulder and added, "And if you ever forget how to feel, come find me." Then he walked away into the night, disappearing into the soft glow of the riverside lamps. Yibo stood frozen, the bracelet warm against his skin. His heart beat louder than the city around him. For the first time in 500 days, he didn't feel numb. He felt something. Something unmistakable. Something that terrified him. Something that saved him. He whispered into the wind, barely audible even to himself, "I won't disappear." And somewhere ahead, already out of sight, Xiao Zhan smiled, as if he somehow heard.